What if everything you've been taught about prayer has actually been keeping you separated from the very miracles you're desperately seeking? I know that sounds almost blasphemous, maybe even dangerous to suggest, but stay with me until the end of this video because what you're about to discover could completely transform the way you experience divine presence in your life. For years, perhaps even decades, you've approached God the same way. You've bowed your head, closed your eyes, and begun listing everything you need. Healing for that persistent condition, financial breakthrough for those mounting bills, clarity for that impossible decision, peace for that anxious mind. And you've done it with such sincerity, such desperation, pouring your heart out in those quiet moments or crying out loud when the pain became unbearable. You've been faithful, you've been persistent, you've believed with everything in you. But here's what nobody talks about in church, what spiritual teachers rarely address directly. Has this ever happened to you? The more intensely you pray for something, the more distant the answer seems to become. You plead for peace, and your anxiety somehow intensifies. You beg for clarity, and the confusion deepens. You cry out for provision, and the lack feels even more suffocating. It's like you're pushing against an invisible wall, and the harder you push, the more solid it becomes. But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future videos. Now, there's something happening beneath the surface of all this striving and asking that most people never recognize. Every time you approach God from a place of desperate need, every time you formulate another request, another petition, another plea, you're unconsciously broadcasting a very specific message into the universe. When you pray for healing, you're declaring, "I am sick." When you beg for financial breakthrough, you're affirming, "I am in lack." When you ask for peace, you're announcing, "I am in turmoil." The paradox is almost cruel in its simplicity. The very act of asking reinforces the exact condition you're trying to escape. Your consciousness becomes locked in a loop, constantly focused on what you don't have, what isn't working, what's missing from your life. And the universe, responding to the frequency you're broadcasting rather than the words you're speaking, continues to mirror that lack back to you. What you're about to discover might challenge everything you thought you knew about spiritual practice, about prayer, about your relationship with the divine. Because there's another way, a hidden path that the mystics and spiritual masters have walked for centuries. A way that doesn't involve more asking, more begging, more desperate petitioning. Instead, it involves something that might sound completely counterintuitive, maybe even a little frightening at first. It involves letting go of your own thinking entirely and allowing something far greater than your individual consciousness to think through you instead. This is the hidden truth that spiritual masters across every tradition have discovered, often after years of struggling with the same desperate prayers, the same unanswered petitions. They found that the most powerful state of being isn't asking God for anything at all. It's not about finding the right words, the perfect formula, or the most passionate plea. The transformation happens in a completely different dimension of consciousness altogether. What they discovered was this: when you surrender every thought you have, when you release your grip on trying to figure everything out, you create space for divine intelligence to literally become your mind, not your helper, standing beside you, not some cosmic assistant responding to your requests from a distance, but your actual thinking, your awareness, your consciousness itself. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic because this isn't just some mystical concept meant to sound profound. This is a practical shift that changes how you navigate every single decision, every challenge, every moment of your day. Imagine what would happen if you stopped approaching life with that constant mental chatter, that endless internal dialogue, trying to calculate outcomes, predict consequences, control variables. Your mind has been running these strategies for so long that you probably don't even notice it anymore. It's become background noise, this perpetual attempt to manage reality with your limited human thinking. But here's what happens when you release that grip, when you stop trying to be the architect of your own breakthrough and instead open yourself to receive divine intelligence flowing through you. As naturally as breath flows through your lungs, as effortlessly as your heart beats, without you having to consciously direct it. There's a shift in your entire energetic field. The anxiety that was always humming beneath the surface starts to quiet. The desperation that colored every prayer begins to dissolve, and in that space, something extraordinary becomes possible. If this resonated with you, hit that subscribe button and join this community of seekers exploring what it means to live from divine intelligence rather than anxious human thinking. You start making decisions from a completely different place, not from fear about what might happen if you choose wrong, not from desperate attempts to force outcomes, but from a quiet knowing that emerges when your own frantic thinking steps aside. Opportunities that were always there, but invisible to your cluttered consciousness, suddenly appear right in front of you. Revelations come not through your straining and struggling, but through simple receptivity. This is the journey from human striving to divine flow, from the exhausting burden of trying to control everything to the grace of allowing infinite wisdom to guide your path. Behind the scenes of this practice, your whole relationship with existence transforms. The impact shows up in ways you can actually measure, actually experience in your daily reality. Write, "I'm ready to receive" in the comments if this is resonating with something deep inside you. Because here's the revelation that changes everything about how you approach divine connection. The abundance you're seeking, the guidance you're desperately trying to access, the healing you've been begging for, the love you think is being withheld from you. None of it is locked away somewhere waiting for you to say the magic words or prove yourself worthy. It's flowing toward you right now, in this exact moment, like a perpetual stream that has never stopped, not even for a single second. The problem isn't that God is ignoring your prayers or testing your faith with divine silence. The problem is far more practical than that, and understanding it completely transforms your entire spiritual journey. Your consciousness is tuned to the wrong frequency. Think about it like this. Imagine there's a radio station broadcasting the most extraordinary music throughout the entire universe. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, never pausing, never fading. This broadcast has been playing since before you were born and will continue long after you're gone. The music is always there, the signal is always strong, the transmission is always perfect. Now here's the crucial question that determines your entire experience. Is whether the music exists? No, the music is definitely there. The real question is this: are you tuned in to receive it? When you turn your radio dial to static, the music doesn't stop broadcasting. The signal doesn't weaken. The station doesn't go offline waiting for you to find. It continues playing exactly as it always has. You're simply not positioned to hear it. This is precisely what happens in your spiritual life every single day. Divine intelligence is constantly transmitting solutions to your problems, opportunities for breakthrough, wisdom for your decisions, revelations about your path. The broadcast never stops. But when your mind is cluttered with fear-based thinking, when you're operating from that frantic energy of desperate asking, when your consciousness is dominated by anxious thoughts about what you lack and how to get it, you're essentially tuned to static. The interference is so loud, so overwhelming, that you can't perceive what's already being transmitted directly to you. Behind the scenes, this creates a pattern that most people live with their entire lives without ever recognizing it. They keep asking louder, praying harder, trying different techniques and formulas, all while remaining on the wrong frequency. The transformation they're seeking isn't about convincing God to finally send what they need. It's about adjusting their own consciousness to receive what's already being given. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic because understanding how to make that frequency shift, how to actually tune yourself to divine transmission, is where the real impact happens. Type tuning in if you're beginning to see how this works. And this is where most people unknowingly sabotage themselves without even realizing it. When you're stuck in that constant mode of asking, petitioning, pleading with God to please give you what you need, something happens at an energetic level that's actually working against everything you're trying to achieve. Your entire being begins vibrating with the frequency of lack. Every desperate prayer, no matter how sincere, carries an underlying current that's broadcasting a very specific message into the universe. I am incomplete. I am broken. I am separate from what I need. Think about how this shows up in your daily experience. You approach someone from a place of desperate neediness, and they instinctively pull back. You relate to opportunities from scarcity consciousness, and they seem to evaporate. It's not because the universe is cruel or God is punishing you. It's simply the law of resonance at work. The energy you're putting out is being mirrored back to you with mathematical precision. When you're vibrating at the frequency of I don't have, life responds by giving you more experiences of not having. This vibration of lack actually pushes away the very things you're reaching for, like trying to grasp water with clenched fists. The tighter you grip, the faster it slips away. But here's where the transformation becomes possible, where the entire game changes in ways that can feel almost miraculous once you experience it. When you surrender your thoughts and let God be your mind. When you stop generating that desperate asking energy and instead simply open yourself to receive, you create an entirely different energetic reality. The shift is subtle at first, but the impact is profound. Instead of broadcasting lack, you begin resonating with fullness. Instead of separation consciousness, you start embodying union with the divine source itself. There's a quiet confidence that settles into your being when this happens, and it's important to understand what this confidence actually is. It's not ego, it's not arrogance or false bravado. It's something far deeper, far more authentic. It's the recognition of a truth that has always been there, waiting for you to notice it. What God has, I have. What God is, I am. This isn't blasphemy. This is the most humble acknowledgement possible, because you're finally understanding that your good doesn't come from your own efforts, your own thinking, your own clever strategies. It flows through you as divine expression, as naturally and effortlessly as rivers flow to the ocean. Now I want to go even deeper into this topic because understanding this intellectually is one thing, but experiencing how this mindset shift actually shows up in real situations, in daily decisions, in the practical challenges you face, that's where everything becomes tangible and real. Drop divine flow in the comments if you're starting to feel this shift happening inside you. Because the beautiful truth about this entire transformation is that it doesn't require elaborate rituals, years of spiritual training, or some special initiation into secret knowledge. The shift begins with something so simple that most people dismiss it as too easy to be effective. Just 10 minutes of your day. That's all. 10 minutes where you stop approaching spirituality like you're placing an order at a restaurant, rattling off your list of needs and demands to some cosmic waiter who may or may not bring what you asked for. Instead, you sit quietly, in whatever way feels natural to you, and you say 1. Simple thing within yourself. I'm now open to receive all that God is giving me. Notice what's not happening in that statement. There's no begging involved, no bargaining with promises of better behavior if you just get what you want. No desperate pleading for specific outcomes. You're not trying to convince God to finally pay attention to your needs or manipulate reality through sheer force of will. You're simply acknowledging something that has always been true. Divine supply is already flowing toward you, and you're opening your consciousness to receive it. This mindset shift might seem subtle, but behind the scenes, it's completely revolutionary. You're moving from the exhausting energy of pushing and forcing and striving to the natural flow of receiving. Think about how effortlessly the earth receives rain. Does it strain? Does it worry whether the clouds will open? Does it create complicated strategies to make the precipitation happen? No. It simply remains receptive. And when the rain falls, it receives. Your lungs don't beg for air. They breathe in the oxygen that's already surrounding you. A flower doesn't manufacture sunlight through determination. It turns toward the sun and receives what's being offered. This is what happens when you practice those 10 minutes each day. You're not forcing visualizations while your mind screams that it won't work. You're not straining through affirmations while secretly doubting every word. You're not white-knuckling your way through some spiritual technique. You're simply being receptive, creating space for revelations and intuitive wisdom to emerge naturally, like spring water bubbling up from an underground source that was always there waiting to be tapped. This is the transformation from exhausting struggle to effortless grace, from the burden of trying to control every outcome with your limited human thinking to the freedom of letting infinite wisdom think through you. And the impact accumulates with each day you practice. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic because what happens when you actually start living this way, when it moves from theory into your real daily experience, reveals dimensions most people never discover. Right, opening to receive, if you're ready to make this practice part of your journey. Let me share something with you that demonstrates exactly what this looks like when someone actually makes this shift in their real life, facing real challenges that feel impossible to overcome. There was a woman named Maria who spent 3 years praying for financial breakthrough with an intensity that was almost violent. Every night she would literally shake her fists at heaven, demanding answers, begging God to fix her mounting debt and dwindling bank account. She filled journals with prayer requests, attended every prosperity teaching she could find, declared affirmations until her voice went hoarse. But here's what she noticed. The more desperately she asked, the worse her situation became. It was like watching someone try to catch water with clenched fists. The tighter she gripped, the faster it slipped away. When Maria discovered this teaching about receptivity, about surrendering thoughts and letting God be your mind, her first reaction was fear. If I stop asking, God will completely forget about me, she thought. But desperation had brought her to a breaking point where she was willing to try anything. She committed to 30 days of practicing differently. Each morning and evening, she would sit quietly, release all those anxious calculations about how to fix her finances, and simply open herself to receive divine supply without demanding specific outcomes. The transformation didn't happen overnight. The first 2 weeks felt brutal. Nothing seemed to be changing externally, and internally she felt empty, almost frightened by the silence. But behind the scenes, something profound was shifting in her energy field. That constant knot of anxiety that had lived in her chest for 3 years began loosening its grip. Her sleep improved. Her decisions became clearer, less driven by panic. By week 3, the impact started showing up in tangible ways. An unexpected freelance opportunity appeared through an old contact she hadn't heard from in years. A debt she thought was permanent got mysteriously forgiven through a company restructuring. A refund check she'd completely forgotten about arrived in the mail. None of these things came from her, striving or strategizing. They emerged naturally as she stopped blocking the flow with her desperate asking. Then there's David, who battled chronic illness for 5 years, while his prayer life became an exhausting cycle of begging and bargaining. The turning point in his journey came when he surrendered his thoughts about his condition entirely. Instead of fighting his symptoms with anxious mental strategies, he opened himself daily to receive perfect health as his divine inheritance. Within a year, his doctors used words like spontaneous remission. David had a different name for it, learning to let God be his mind. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic because these stories reveal something crucial about how divine intelligence operates when we step aside and allow it to work through us. Type "I surrender" if these transformations are resonating with your own experience. But perhaps the most challenging territory where this principle reveals its power is in relationships, where the temptation to control outcomes feels almost irresistible. There's a woman named Jennifer whose story takes this into the most difficult dimension of human experience. For years, she had been on her knees praying the same desperate prayer every single night. Please change my husband, make him understand me, fix our communication, transform him into the partner I need. Every prayer was focused outward, asking God to manipulate someone else, to force external circumstances to align with what she thought would make her happy. What Jennifer didn't realize was that this entire approach was reinforcing the very separation she was trying to heal. Her asking was broadcasting a message into the universe with every petition. I am incomplete. He is wrong. We are broken. When she encountered this teaching on receptivity, something inside her resisted immediately. If I stop asking God to fix my marriage, it will definitely fall apart, she thought. But her current strategy clearly wasn't working, so she decided to experiment with a radically different approach. Instead of trying to control her husband or manipulate outcomes with her thoughts, she practiced receiving divine love into her own consciousness. Each morning, she would sit quietly, surrendering all her judgments about what he should be doing differently, opening herself simply to receive God's love without conditions or demands. The transformation started so subtly, she almost didn't notice it at first. She found herself responding to him differently, less reactive when he said things that used to trigger her, more peaceful in situations that previously sparked conflict, genuinely more loving without forcing it or pretending. Behind the scenes, as she let God be her mind instead of operating from her own anxious thinking, the entire relationship dynamic began shifting. He started responding differently too, not because she was manipulating him, but because the energy she was bringing into their interactions had fundamentally changed. This reveals something crucial about how divine intelligence works. When you transform your own consciousness, you change the field that everyone around you is responding to. And this brings us to what most people get completely wrong about spiritual practice when facing any challenge in life. The automatic response, when something goes wrong, is to identify the problem and then ask God to fix it. You focus intensely on the condition, analyzing every detail of what's broken, and then you petition God to come in and change it. But the breakthrough comes when you realize something revolutionary. You don't treat the condition at all. You treat your consciousness instead. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic because understanding this distinction transforms how you approach every challenge that shows up in your path. Put treating consciousness in the comments if this is making sense to you. When you actually begin practicing this way, when you start surrendering your thoughts and letting God be your mind, there's a persistent feeling that overwhelms almost everyone who takes this journey. It's the uncomfortable sensation that you're doing absolutely nothing. And this feeling can be so intense, so unsettling, that it drives most people right back to their old patterns of asking, striving, and controlling. Because asking feels active, doesn't it? It feels powerful. It feels like you're taking charge, making things happen, being responsible for your life. Receiving, on the other hand, feels passive, lazy, almost irresponsible. Your ego starts screaming at you. You have to think. You have to figure this out. You can't just sit there doing nothing. You have to make something happen. But here's the revelation that changes everything. That uncomfortable feeling of doing nothing is actually a sign that you're making real progress. What you're experiencing is the dissolution of your habitual interference with divine flow. For your entire life, you've been operating under the assumption that you have to make everything happen through your own thinking and effort. You've been trained to believe that if you're not actively strategizing, calculating, and forcing outcomes, nothing will work. Now you're learning to step aside, and it feels completely foreign, maybe even frightening. Yet behind the scenes, something profoundly active is taking place when you surrender. You're not being passive at all. You're being receptive, which is incredibly powerful in the spiritual dimension. You're allowing infinite intelligence to think through you, to guide your decisions, to orchestrate circumstances in ways your limited human mind could never conceive. This is where the ultimate transformation happens, the shift that goes deeper than any technique or practice, because the hidden truth about your actual identity changes the entire game. You are not a separate human being disconnected from God, trying to get things from an external deity who may or may not respond to your requests. You are the very consciousness of God, receiving awareness of your own infinite nature. When you let God be your mind, you're not getting something new that you didn't have before. You're removing the veil that has been blocking your recognition of what has always been yours. You're not becoming spiritual through effort and practice. You're recognizing the spirituality that has always been your essential nature, just covered over by layers of false identification and separation consciousness. God has never stopped living through you. Divine intelligence has been flowing through your consciousness since before you were born. The only obstacle was your unawareness of this eternal truth. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic because when you actually start living from this awareness, when it moves from concept to daily experience, your entire relationship with existence transforms. Right, I am divine consciousness. If this truth is beginning to awaken in you, if you've made it this far with me, I want you to know something. You're not here by accident. The fact that you've stayed through this entire exploration tells me you're genuinely ready for this shift in consciousness. You're not just casually browsing spiritual content. You're actively seeking the transformation that comes from letting God think through you, from surrendering the exhausting burden of trying to control everything with your limited human mind. I create these videos because I truly believe these insights have the power to change lives, not through my words, but through the eternal truths they point toward. If this message resonated with something deep inside you, I'd love for you to join this community of seekers who are learning to move from separation consciousness to divine receptivity. Hit that subscribe button so you can continue this journey with us, because each video explores another dimension of what it means to live from divine intelligence rather than anxious human thinking. And here's what would mean the world to me. Drop a comment below saying, "This message was meant for me, so I know you were here, that you received this, that something shifted in you as we walked through this together." Your presence in this community matters more than you realize. A gentle tap on the like button helps this teaching reach others who are searching for exactly what you just discovered. It's a small gesture that creates ripples far beyond what we can see. There's a video right here that goes even deeper into how to practically live from this consciousness in your daily life. Click on it, and let's continue this conversation together. I'll meet you there.
Let us enter this hour with a quiet mind and a receptive heart, for the truth we seek today is not found in the movement of thought, nor in the activity of the human mind, but in the stillness that reveals what has forever been true. When we hear the familiar words, "Be still and know that I am God," we often accept them merely as comforting scripture, something to remember in times of trouble. Yet we seldom pause long enough to discover that within those words lies the entire secret of spiritual life. These words are not addressed to a mortal being attempting to reach a distant deity. They are a revelation from the infinite to itself, inviting us to become aware of the presence that has never been absent. We must understand from the beginning that the stillness spoken of here is not the silence of a quiet room, nor is it a discipline imposed upon the human mind. It is an inner resting, an attitude of non-resistance, a release of the ceaseless attempt to think our way to God. For as long as we approach truth through thought, as long as we believe that spiritual realization can be achieved through the effort of the human intellect, we remain outside the very awareness this passage reveals. Be still is the divine instruction to withdraw our dependence upon the mind, upon language, upon the outer world of forms, and to open ourselves to the presence that announces itself. Only when we are no longer attempting to generate spiritual experience, in this hour, we are not trying to find God, reach God, change God, or persuade God. We are simply acknowledging that the infinite, invisible, the presence we call God, is the reality of our own being, and that it reveals itself when the mind grows quiet. Therefore, as we begin our study, let us not approach these words with the intention to gain something, to acquire something, or to make something happen. Let us rest in the assurance that the truth already is, that the presence is already here, and that our task is only to become receptive to it. When we enter this silence, with no desire for personal gain, and with no attempt to shape spiritual experience, we discover that the eye of Scripture, the eye that is God, begins to disclose its nature as our own true being. And in that revelation, peace flows of its own accord. As we continue, let us hold gently in thought that the nature of God is not to be found in words, nor in sounds, nor in anything that the human senses can grasp. God is not reached through the intellect, nor through the emotions, nor through any form of mental activity. God is the infinite, invisible, the presence that reveals itself only in the silence of our inner being. When Scripture tells us, "Be still and know that I am God," it is indicating that the knowing of God takes place only when the activity of the human mind has been set aside. For the divine can be known only by the divine, and the human mind, being finite, can never encompass the infinite. It is a mistake to believe that our thoughts about God bring us closer to God. Thoughts are always of the mind, and the mind itself is but an instrument useful on the human plane, but incapable of penetrating the realm of spirit. When we attempt to think spiritual thoughts, we are not touching spirit, we are merely producing mental concepts. The presence of God is not a thought, nor an emotion, nor an idea that can be held or repeated. It is a living reality, a presence that exists long before thought arises and remains long after thought has ceased. And so, when we speak of silence, we do not mean merely the absence of noise. We mean the absence of mental activity, the surrender of the belief that the mind can reach God. In this silence, we discover that God does not speak in words. The voice of God is not a sound, it is an impartation, a spiritual influence that touches our awareness with a certainty, a peace, a clarity that no human language can convey. When the mind is quiet, when the emotions are still, when the desires and fears of the personal self have subsided, there arises within us a gentle assurance, a recognition that the presence is here. This is the true knowing of God, not the mind's assertion, but the soul's awareness. The divine never shouts, it never argues, it never compels. The activity of God is a quiet flowing like a river that moves without effort, like the breath that enters and leaves without command. And if we would become aware of this presence, we must enter its own nature. We cannot hear the still small voice while speaking. We cannot feel the presence while thinking. It is in the relinquishing of all attempts to reach God that the realization dawns. God is already the life I am living. This is the reason silence is essential, not as a technique or discipline, but as the atmosphere in which the infinite discloses itself. Let us, then, accept that the nature of God is silence, and that to know God is to allow that silence to permeate our being. In this way, we do not climb toward heaven. We rest in the awareness that heaven is within us, and in that resting, we receive the impartation of spirit, which does the work that thought could never accomplish. Let us now look gently and honestly at a question that has troubled spiritual seekers for centuries. Why do so many prayers go unanswered? Why do we find ourselves pleading with God, affirming truth, repeating sacred words, and yet experiencing so little change? The answer is not that God withholds, nor that God sometimes turns away and sometimes responds. God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. An unchanging love, an unchanging presence, an unchanging law of harmony. The difficulty lies not in God's willingness, but in our approach. Indeed, the very nature of our praying often prevents us from receiving the impartation of spirit. When we pray from fear, from desire, from anxiety, from a sense of lack or danger, we are praying from a state of mental agitation. We are not still. We are not receptive. We are not resting in truth. We are pleading from a belief in separation. The mind is active, reaching outward, seeking rescue, trying to bring God into the situation. But God need not come anywhere. God is already the substance of our being, already the life of us, already the intelligence functioning as our very existence. The moment we attempt to bring God to a problem, we are declaring, without realizing it, that God is absent. This is why ordinary prayer fails. It begins with the belief that God is somewhere else, that God must be summoned, persuaded, or convinced. It believes that if we make our case well enough, God will intervene. But such prayer only reinforces the illusion that we are separate beings trying to contact a distant deity. In that state, the mind is restless, concerned, fearful, and a restless mind cannot be the instrument through which spirit reveals itself. You see, the mind that prays for God to act is the very mind that must become still before God can be known. As long as we are reaching outward, we cannot receive inwardly. As long as we are speaking, we cannot hear. As long as we are thinking, we cannot feel the presence. True prayer is not speaking to God. It is not asking, demanding, or declaring. True prayer is the quiet awareness of God already present, already functioning, already fulfilling its own nature in and as our being. When Jesus said, "Your Father knoweth what things ye have need of before ye ask," he was revealing that all outward prayer is unnecessary movement. The divine does not require information from us. The divine does not require persuasion. Everything that God is, wisdom, harmony, life, love, supply, is already embodied within us. but we cannot feel this embodiment while the mind is filled with petition. Therefore, the failure of prayer is not the failure of God. It is the failure to become still enough to let God announce himself, and when that stillness comes even for a moment, the entire nature of prayer changes. It ceases to be request and becomes realization. It ceases to be reaching and becomes resting. It ceases to be human effort and becomes spiritual impartation. This is the secret behind the words, "Be still and know that I am God." In the stillness, we discover that there is nothing to ask, nothing to seek, nothing to demand. There is only the recognition of what already is. As we move deeper into our study, let us consider more fully what it means to be still. These words are often interpreted as an instruction to quiet the body or subdue the mind, but their true significance goes far beyond physical stillness or mental discipline. Be still is a doorway into the highest form of spiritual contact, a contact not achieved through effort, but revealed when all effort ceases. To be still is to relinquish our dependence on the human mind. It is to surrender the belief that the mind can solve our problems, find our good, or bring God into our experience. When we attempt to use thought to reach God, we remain in the realm of the finite, trying to touch the infinite with an instrument incapable of knowing it. But the moment we release this effort, even briefly, a new dimension opens, one in which the soul, not the mind, becomes aware of the presence that has never been absent. Spiritual contact is not an event the human self can produce. It is not the result of repeating sacred words or practicing techniques. It is the natural unfolding of divine awareness when the surface activity of the mind subsides. Just as a lake reflects the sky only when its waters are undisturbed, so the divinity within reveals itself when the mind grows quiet. We cannot force this stillness. We can only allow it. And as we allow it, something profound begins to take place. In that moment of true stillness, there is a gentle recognition, not a thought, not a belief, not a mental conclusion, but an inward knowing that God is here. The presence announces itself, not with sound, not with image, but with a depth of peace that no human reasoning can produce. This is the spiritual contact that changes everything. It is not the contact of a person with a God. It is the divine consciousness recognizing its own presence as our being. This is why be still must precede a know. The knowing of God does not come through thinking, it comes through being. It arises in the silence beneath thought, in the stillness beneath desire, in the quiet place where the human self has stepped aside. In that sacred instant, the personal I dissolves, and the true I, the I that is God, reveals itself as the very life we are. This contact may last only a moment, but that moment is enough, for in that moment, something within us has touched reality, and that touch becomes the law of harmony unto our entire experience. It resolves problems, not because we have solved them, but because we have entered the atmosphere in which God alone is power, presence, and activity. So when we speak of being still, let us remember that we are not imposing silence. We are resting in the silence that already exists. We are not creating peace. We are entering the peace that is always present. We are not making spiritual contact. We are receiving the awareness of a contact that has never been broken. Let us now look together at one of the most important principles in the entire spiritual life: the utter inability of the human mind to perform spiritual work. If we can grasp this, even dimly, we will find ourselves lifted into a new dimension of practice, one in which spiritual realization flows naturally, without strain or effort. But so long as we believe that the mind is capable of touching God, understanding God, or directing God, we will continue to wander in circles, achieving only moments of comfort rather than the transformative awareness that reveals harmony. The human mind is a remarkable instrument on the material plane. It can calculate, measure, analyze, invent, and organize. It can solve mechanical problems, build cities, and explore the outer universe. But with all its brilliance, it cannot know God. It cannot enter the realm of spirit, for spirit is not a thought, nor a concept, nor an emotion. Spirit is the very essence of being unconditioned, infinite, and indivisible, and the finite mind cannot grasp the infinite. Many seekers have spent years attempting to think truth, believing that if they could affirm God often enough, strongly enough, with enough sincerity, they would draw the presence into activity. But thought has no power to draw God, because God is omnipresent. There is no place from which God must be drawn. And when we attempt to use thought as a bridge to God, we are unknowingly declaring that God is absent, that God must be summoned, that God must be reached through mental activity. This misunderstanding lies at the root of so much frustration on the spiritual path. We imagine that if only we had stronger thoughts, clearer thoughts, more spiritual thoughts, more positive thoughts, we would finally contact the divine. But the Infinite Way teaches that thought is never the doorway to spirit. At its highest, thought can point to truth, but it cannot reveal truth. It cannot produce realization. It cannot establish spiritual contact. Why? Because thought is always dualistic. It always divides good and bad, right and wrong, truth and error, God and man. Spirit recognizes no such division. Spirit is one. Thought, by its very nature, cannot enter unity. It operates only in the realm of concepts. Therefore, the moment we turn to thought as the means of attaining God, we remove ourselves from the very atmosphere in which God reveals himself. This is why spiritual healing does not come through affirmations, nor through denials, nor through mental arguments. No matter how pure our thoughts may be, they remain thoughts, and God is not found in them. The spiritual practitioner does not direct truth toward a person or condition, nor does he attempt to mentally correct error. Instead, he becomes still, releases all mental activity, and allows the presence to announce itself. In that impartation, harmony reveals itself not because of anything he has thought or declared, but because he has set aside the mind and allowed spirit to come through. If we would truly understand the words, "Be still and know that I am God," we must accept this. The knowing of God does not occur in the mind. It occurs when the mind is silent. The mind, with all its reasoning, desiring, fearing, and reaching, is the only barrier to realization. When that activity subsides, even for a moment, the divine consciousness that has always been present shines forth in its own light. Therefore, let us cease relying on thought as our spiritual instrument and begin to rely entirely on awareness. Silent, receptive, surrendered awareness. In this atmosphere, the truth reveals itself effortlessly, and that revelation becomes the law unto our experience. It dissolves fear. It resolves discord. It restores harmony without the movement of thought, without the activity of personal effort, without the intervention of the human will. For in the presence of the One, all illusion collapses of its own weight. Let us now look gently into the sacred mystery of spiritual healing, for here too the same principle governs. All healing is the revelation of God's presence and this revelation takes place only in silence. No practitioner heals by thought. No practitioner heals by virtue of personal understanding or mental ability. All true healing is the activity of God made evident when the practitioner becomes still enough to let the presence announce itself. When someone calls upon you for help, you may feel at first the natural human impulse to correct the condition, to relieve the suffering, to restore harmony. But in that very impulse lies the temptation to turn again toward thought, toward the desire to do something, accomplish something, or bring about a change. The Infinite Way teaches that if we attempt to correct the outer picture, we remain in the realm of the picture itself. Healing never occurs in the picture. It occurs in consciousness. And consciousness reveals harmony when it is free of mental interference. Therefore, the moment a call for help comes, the practitioner does not reach for a technique, nor does he begin to declare truths or repeat familiar statements. He moves inward not to think, but to rest. He withdraws interest from the appearance, knowing that the appearance has no power, no law, no substance of its own. He does not attempt to make the condition better. He does not attempt to correct it mentally. He simply becomes still, and in that stillness, a remarkable thing begins to take place. The sense of a personal I, an individual healer with responsibility and burden, disappears. What remains is awareness, pure, open, receptive awareness. Into that awareness the presence flows, not as something newly arrived, but as something newly recognized. The impartation may be so gentle that it cannot be described. It may appear as a quiet assurance, a soft inner warmth, a peace that touches the very core of the being. Sometimes it is so subtle that one becomes aware of it only in retrospect, when the healing has already unfolded. This is the moment of spiritual contact, and it is always silent. No words are spoken inwardly or outwardly. No argument takes place. No denial of error is made. The activity of spirit reveals itself as the awareness of one presence, one power, one life. And in that awareness, disease loses its reality, lack loses its hold, fear dissolves. Why? Because the appearance, whatever form it took, was never a presence, never a power, never a law. It was only a belief sustained by mental activity. When the mental activity ceases, the belief has nothing upon which to rest, and so it fades. Healing does not come because we have changed something. Healing comes because we have witnessed the truth that nothing needed to be changed. God alone is, and where God is realized as the substance, life, and identity of all being, no opposite condition can stand. The presence is the principle. It performs the work. The practitioner merely rests in an inner silence that allows the truth to come through. Often the healing appears outwardly in ways the human mind cannot understand. A condition that seemed chronic begins to improve. A relationship softens. A financial need is quietly met without struggle. None of this happens because the practitioner sent healing power. There is no power to send. It happens because the realized presence dissolves the illusion of a second power. An opposing condition and harmony reveals itself as the natural state of being. So let us understand, spiritual healing is not the correcting of matter. It is not the altering of circumstances. It is the quiet realization of God as the only presence and power. And this realization unfolds not in words, not in thought, but in the divine stillness that rests beneath all mental activity. In that stillness, God is known. In that knowing, harmony appears. Let us now turn toward the practical side of our work. not to introduce a method or a technique, for in the infinite way we do not rely on methods, but to offer a way of entering the atmosphere in which realization may dawn. You see, stillness cannot be achieved through force, nor can it be produced through discipline. Stillness is not something we create, it is something we allow. And so our practice is not one of effort, but of gentle recognition. Begin your day, if possible, by sitting quietly for a few moments, not with the intention of accomplishing something, nor of reaching God, nor of making spiritual contact. Simply sit as one who is willing to be receptive. You do not need to prepare your mind with thoughts, nor fill the silence with affirmations. Let the mind settle naturally, just as dust settles when the air grows calm. If thoughts arise, do not fight them, for the very act of resisting thought is itself a form of mental activity. Allow the thoughts to come and go, as clouds drifting across the sky, without giving them power or interest. In this quiet moment, you may gently acknowledge a simple truth, not as a statement to convince yourself, but as a reminder. Thy presence is here, or if you prefer, I rest in God. Say it once, inwardly, without emphasis, then let it go. Do not repeat it. Do not turn it over in your mind. Simply rest. There is no need to hold the truth, for the truth holds you. As you continue in this receptive state, something within you will begin to shift. You may feel no great experience, and that is perfectly fine. You may sense only a slight relaxation, an easing of tension, or a quiet awareness that the moment is complete within itself. But if you remain open, without expectation, a gentle impartation may come, a sense of peace, a soft inner assurance, a feeling of being upheld. This is not something you produce. It is the activity of the presence announcing itself. After a few minutes, you may rise and begin your day. Do not evaluate the experience. Do not ask whether anything happened. Spiritual realization is not measured by sensation. Even if your mind felt busy, even if no peace seemed to come, the very act of turning within has prepared the ground for future unfoldment. Remember, unseen activity is often the most powerful. Just as a seed germinates beneath the soil long before it breaks the surface, so the activity of spirit takes place within your consciousness long before you become aware of it outwardly. Throughout the day, pause. Whenever you feel yourself being drawn into fear, anxiety, or the belief in two powers, close your eyes for a brief moment, take a quiet inward breath, and simply acknowledge, God is here. Again, no repetition, no effort to make something happen, just the recognition. In that one instant of turning within, the mind steps aside and grace finds an opening through which to reveal itself. This simple practice, repeated gently and without strain, cultivates an inner habit of receptivity. Eventually, the stillness becomes not something you enter, but something that follows you, accompanies you, surrounds you. You begin to live from a center of quiet awareness, and in that atmosphere the presence speaks, not in words, but as a continuous flow of peace, assurance, and harmony. This is the essence of spiritual practice in the infinite way, not thinking, not striving, but resting in the truth that the divine is already the life of your being. As we come to this next stage of our work, let us understand that the purpose of stillness is not confined to moments of meditation. A few minutes of quiet reflection may open the door, but it is in the unfolding of the day that the deeper fruit of realization appears. The goal is not to retire from life in order to be spiritual. It is to carry the awareness of the presence into every circumstance until the activity of God is felt in the very midst of ordinary experience. When you begin to sense this inner stillness throughout the day, you will notice something remarkable. You no longer respond to appearances with the same urgency, fear, or excitement. The outer world begins to lose its power to disturb you because you have touched the deeper world that lies beneath it. You have discovered that harmony does not come from conditions but from consciousness, and that consciousness, resting in truth, governs the outer picture with effortless grace. As you go about your daily tasks, working, conversing, caring for your home, engaging with others, you will find opportunities to pause inwardly, even for a second, and remember, God is the only presence here. You may not say it in words. You may simply feel it, a quiet recognition, a gentle awareness, an inner loosening of the mind's grip. And in that recognition, the conditions around you begin to take on a different quality. Obstacles soften, tensions ease, solutions arise without struggle. Why? Not because you have manipulated the situation, but because your consciousness, now imbued with spiritual awareness, no longer resists the natural activity of grace. This is the secret of living from the realization of God's presence. Life becomes less a process of seeking and more a process of allowing. You do not strive to make things happen. You watch them unfold. You do not reach for supply. Supply appears as the expression of divine abundance. You do not struggle with relationships. Harmony emerges as the natural state where God is recognized as the identity of all. You do not wage war against fear or sickness. You see them for what they are, shadows that vanish in the light of realization. In this new way of living, you discover that nothing in the outer world needs to be conquered or corrected. The only work is inward to maintain, as best you can, the awareness that the presence is here and that it alone governs all activity. Some days you may feel deeply connected. Other days you may feel distracted or troubled. This is natural. Spiritual realization unfolds gradually, like dawn breaking over the horizon. Some mornings are brilliant with light. Others reveal only a faint glow. But whether the sky is bright or dim, the sun is always rising. As you persist gently in recognizing the presence, you begin to experience a profound shift in your sense of identity. You no longer see yourself as a struggling, thinking, planning human being. You begin to sense that life is living itself through you, that there is a divine activity moving your actions, guiding your decisions, arranging your steps. This is what the Infinite Way calls letting God govern, not by withdrawing from the world, but by entering it with a heart attuned to the one presence. And gradually, without effort, you find that the presence becomes a companion, an atmosphere, a living reality that accompanies you throughout the day. You do not have to stop and search for God. You feel God as the very ground of your being, the breath of your breath, the intelligence of your decisions, the peace of your interactions, the love behind every encounter. The stillness becomes your resting place, even in movement, and the knowing that I am God, that the divine I is the life of all, becomes the quiet foundation upon which you walk. This is the life of realization. This is the life of be still and know, and it is available in each moment, not through effort, but through remembrance. And now, as we bring this period of study to a close, let us return once more to the simplicity of the silence from which we began. For everything that has been spoken is but a finger pointing toward an inner experience that cannot be conveyed in words. The truth we seek is not carried in sentences, nor held in the mind through memory. It is felt in the quiet awareness that rises when the mind is still and the heart is open. So let us pause for a moment, without intention, without effort, without the desire to achieve anything, and simply rest. The presence we have spoken of is not something we must reach for. It is here. It has been here before the first word was spoken, and it remains now as the life of our being. If we listen not with the ears, but with the soul, we feel that the silence is not empty, it is full. It is alive. It is the very substance of God expressing itself. We need not strain to enter this awareness. We need not hold tightly to any truth. We simply acknowledge, with a light touch, that the same presence which revealed itself to the prophets, the mystics, and the saints is the presence that animates us in this moment. We let this realization settle in our consciousness naturally, without expectation. And as we rest, the peace that surpasses human understanding begins to flow, not because we have called it, but because peace is the nature of God, and God is here. Carry this silence with you as you leave this period of contemplation. Do not attempt to cling to it. Simply remember that it is always available, closer than breath, nearer than thought. In a single instant of turning inward, the presence will again make itself known. Let that be your assurance, your comfort, and your guide. We do not end this work when the words cease. Silence is the real teaching. The presence is the real teacher. And the knowing of God unfolds not through continued effort, but through continued receptivity. So let us leave in quiet gratitude, not gratitude for something gained, but gratitude for the eternal truth that has been revealed, that God is the life of our being, and that in the stillness we know. My friends, let us come together for a few moments in a spirit of deep quietude, for the truth we seek cannot be found in the noise of human thought, nor in the restless activity of the mind that is forever attempting to grasp, to acquire, to understand. The spiritual life begins when we discover that God is not something to be reached through effort, nor a presence we must draw toward ourselves through prayer or ritual. God is already the very life of our being, already the ground upon which we stand, already the consciousness by which we awaken each morning and by which we rest each night. And so, before we go further, let us set aside the notion that we are here to acquire something or to gain spiritual attainment. We are here only to recognize that which has forever been true. The silence into which we enter is not a method nor a practice to achieve a goal, but a resting in the awareness that the infinite is already functioning as our very self. As we sit in this inner stillness, we are not trying to summon God, nor persuade God, nor reach upward toward God. We are simply withdrawing attention from the distractions of the outer world so that the presence, which is always at the center of our being, may reveal itself. In this recognition, we begin to feel a gentle loosening of the tensions of mind, a soft falling away of the sense of personal responsibility to make something happen, and a quiet realization that the spiritual life is not something we create, but something we allow to unfold. As we proceed, remember this: the kingdom is not attained by striving, but by becoming still. Not by the power of thought, but by the silence in which thought ceases to dominate. In that sacred silence, God reveals God, and that is the purpose of our time together. As we move more deeply into this message, it is essential that we establish the foundation upon which all true spiritual realization rests. That God is not a distant being, nor an external power, nor an influence that must be invited into our experience. God is the very consciousness with which you are now hearing these words. This is the first great revelation that comes to the seeker when he stops seeking and becomes still enough to feel the truth rather than think it. The moment you recognize that the life you call I is not a private, personal life, but the activity of the infinite expressing itself as your individual being, the entire nature of your spiritual journey changes. No longer is God something to reach, to acquire, or to persuade. The presence is already here, already functioning as your awareness, your breath, your capacity to perceive, to love, to be. The sense of separation that has haunted humanity for centuries is nothing more than a mental illusion, something believed, not something real. And so long as we believe ourselves to be a self apart from God, a self that must call out to God for help or supply or healing, we remain trapped in the false premise that the divine is somewhere outside the circumference of our own being. In truth, the fullness of God is embodied in every moment of conscious awareness you have ever known. Even your longing for God is not your longing, it is God's own impulse within you, drawing you back to the recognition of what you have always been. When you understand this, even faintly, you begin to lay down the heavy burden of trying to become spiritual, trying to reach enlightenment, trying to attain something higher. You see instead that the spiritual life is a revelation, not a creation. And the revelation begins the moment you realize that God is not something added to you, but the very substance, the very essence, the very consciousness that you have mistakenly believed to be your own. This realization is the doorway into Christ consciousness, and it is already open within you. Now, as we move further along this path of inner unfoldment, it becomes necessary to understand the nature of true spiritual contemplation. And here we must set aside many notions that the world has accepted concerning prayer, meditation, and communion with God. Most forms of prayer, as humanity understands them, are attempts to reach out toward a power believed to be separate from oneself. They are filled with words, desires, supplications, affirmations, or mental imagery, all efforts of the mind to make something happen or to bring something about. But the spiritual life is not lived through the mind's activity. It is lived through the spirit's activity. And the spirit requires no words, no mental effort, no direction from us. True contemplation, as I use the word, is a state in which we cease speaking to God and begin listening for God. In this listening, we are not expecting a voice, not anticipating a message, not waiting for some dramatic experience. We are simply resting in the awareness that there is an infinite presence, an infinite intelligence, and it is here where we are. It is this inner stillness that opens the way for the impartation of truth. When the mind is quiet, when the personal sense of I want, I need, or I must have is silent, then the divine activity begins to flow into consciousness. We become aware, not through thought, but through a gentle spiritual impression of the presence that is always functioning at the center of our being. In this state of listening, we are no longer creators of prayers. We are beholders of God's grace. And this beholding is the essence of Christ's consciousness. It is the recognition that the Father's presence, the divine presence, is already here, speaking itself, revealing itself, making itself known not through effort, but through silence. Therefore, let us understand that every moment we spend in quiet listening is a moment spent in the awareness of God, and that it is in the silence, not in the words, where the true communion takes place. Before we can enter the silence in which the presence reveals itself, there must come a quiet humble willingness to set aside the personal sense of self that has, for so long, attempted to run our lives. This personal I, the human ego, is forever striving, forever fearing, forever planning, forever reaching for something it imagines to be missing. It is this restless selfhood that prevents us from hearing the still small voice, not because God hides himself, but because the noise of personal will leaves no space for the divine impartation to be felt. And so, the preparation for true spiritual communion is not the sharpening of the mind or the strengthening of effort. It is precisely the opposite. It is the gentle surrender of the belief that we know what is needed, that we can direct spiritual power, or that we must control the course of our experience. As long as we approach God with a desire to get something, a healing, a supply, a solution, we remain in the realm of the personal mind where true communion cannot take place. Therefore, the first movement of the soul in preparation for silence is the laying down of all self-initiated purpose. We become as an empty vessel, not in despair, but in receptivity. We relinquish the impulse to guide the meditation, to force an experience, or to condition the presence by our expectations. This emptying is not a dramatic act. It is a quiet recognition that the human self can do nothing of a spiritual nature and need not try. When we adopt this attitude, Father, I do not know, reveal thyself, we step out of the way and make room for the true activity of God. It is in this emptiness, this freedom from personal will, that the door opens inwardly, and the grace of God finds an unobstructed channel through which it may express. This surrender is not loss, it is liberation. For when the personal sense falls silent, the divine life that has always been our life rises into awareness, and we discover that nothing was ever required of us but the willingness to be still. And now, having prepared ourselves through the gentle release of personal will, we come to that sacred moment in which we enter the silence not as seekers, not as beggars, not as individuals striving to attain spiritual experience, but as the very place where God's presence may reveal itself. You will discover, as you continue on this path, that the deepest spiritual practice is beautifully simple. It asks nothing of you except that you rest quietly in the awareness that the infinite is already here. And so, as you sit in stillness, there is no need to shape your thoughts, no need to repeat holy words, no need to engage in affirmation or denial. Those are activities of the mind, and the mind has no part in the revelation of spirit. Instead, let there be a moment of gentle recognition, perhaps only a whisper within your heart of the truth. Here I am, Father, speak, for thy servant heareth. This is not a phrase to repeat. It is not a mantra. It is a momentary turning, an inward remembrance that there is a presence, a love, an intelligence functioning at the center of your being. After this recognition, release even the words. Allow them to dissolve into silence. The practice now becomes pure receptivity. You are not waiting for an experience. You are not hoping for a sign. You are simply being still, inwardly open, inwardly listening without expectation. A soft inner quietness begins to form, a quietness not created by you, but arising of its own accord. The moment you stop leaning upon thought, in that stillness you may sense an unspoken assurance, a peace that is not dependent on conditions, a presence that cannot be named yet is unmistakably real. But even these are not sought. They are simply noticed if they come. And if nothing comes, that too is perfect. For the value of this silence is not in what you feel, but in the fact that you have withdrawn from the mental noise long enough for God to be God in you without interference. This is the beginning of true spiritual communion. This is the doorway to Christ's consciousness, and it is found only in the silence that contains no request, no argument, no effort, only the quiet recognition of omnipresence. As we rest in this holy silence, something begins to take place within us, something not of our doing, not of our planning, and not the result of any mental activity we could initiate. It is a spiritual activity, invisible to sense, yet unmistakably real. Goldsmith called this the impartation, the moment in which the infinite invisible announces itself within your consciousness. But let us be clear, this impartation does not come as a voice, nor as a vision, nor as an emotional surge. It comes as a stillness deeper than silence, a quiet assurance that needs no explanation. In this sacred inner atmosphere, you may discover that the fear which a moment ago seemed so real has dissolved without struggle. Tension that once gripped the mind loosens, not because you worked at it, but because fear and tension cannot exist in the presence of realized truth. You may feel a sense of being upheld, supported, even carried not by effort, but by the recognition of a presence greater than your human sense of life. This is the dawning of Christ consciousness, a subtle yet profound shift in which you know, without any reasoning, that the life you are living is not your own. It is the life of God living itself as you. Nothing dramatic may occur outwardly, yet inwardly something has changed. You find yourself less reactive, less fearful, less dependent upon circumstances. The peace that arises is not a peace you created, it is the peace that passeth understanding, the peace that comes only when the personal sense of self has been set aside long enough for the divine self to make itself known. Often this impartation lasts only a moment, maybe even less than a moment. But in that moment, eternity touches you, and though the mind may rush in afterward with its concerns and questions, something within you has been transformed. You have felt, however faintly, the activity of God within your own consciousness. And this is the beginning of healing, the beginning of transformation, the beginning of a new way of being rooted, not in effort, but in revelation. Nothing more is required of you than to be receptive, to remain available, and to trust that grace knows its own way and its own timing. For Christ consciousness is never attained. It is revealed, and it reveals itself in those silent moments when the human mind yields to the presence that has been there all along. As we continue to rest in this inner stillness, you will begin to notice something quite remarkable. Problems that once held your attention, that seemed urgent, threatening, or insurmountable, begin to soften, lose their intensity, and in many cases dissolve altogether. And this occurs not because you have applied spiritual power to them, not because you have affirmed their unreality, nor because you have demanded a particular outcome. No, this transformation happens precisely because you have not brought the problem into your meditation. You have brought only your awareness of God. In the presence of realized truth, the false sense drops away like a shadow before light. Let us understand a profound principle. A problem, in whatever form it appears, is never an entity in itself. It is only the mental picture formed when we view life from a sense of separation. When the mind is filled with fear, the picture is one of danger. When the mind is filled with lack, the picture is one of limitation. When the mind is filled with a sense of personal responsibility, the picture is one of burdens. But these pictures have no power of their own. They are projections of the mind. And so, the moment we stop trying to fix the picture, stop wrestling with conditions, stop treating effects, we create an opening through which the presence may reveal what has been true all along, that nothing stands apart from God, and therefore nothing has power to oppose the activity of God. In that light, discord dissolves, not because God intervenes, but because the illusion is seen for what it is. Disease yields, not because a human healer has done something, but because the presence is realized as the only life. Lack disappears, not through positive thinking, but through the recognition that omnipresence leaves no space for absence. Harmony is restored, not by manipulating circumstances, but by allowing the divine order to appear where human will has stepped aside. This is why Goldsmith could say that we do not treat conditions, we behold God. The silent practice does not address the problem. It dissolves the false sense that created the problem. In this way, the outer experience changes as a natural consequence of an inner revelation. And so we learn that healing is not an act we perform, nor a result we produce. It is the fruit of realized oneness. It is the evidence that we have touched the presence that is forever whole. Now, it is not enough that we touch this inner presence only in moments of meditation or periods of quiet contemplation. If spiritual living is to become our way of life, this awareness must flow with us into the marketplace, into the home, into our activities, our relationships, and even into the ordinary tasks that fill each day. The purpose of the silence is not to withdraw from life, but to reveal the presence that lives us, guides us, and sustains us in every circumstance. When you rise from meditation, do not leave the atmosphere of stillness behind. Carry it with you as a gentle awareness that there is an invisible something walking with you, going before you, preparing the way. You will discover that your speech becomes quieter, your reactions slower, your judgment softer, because you are no longer meeting the world as a personal self, but as a transparency for the divine. When a challenge presents itself, a moment of irritation, a decision to be made, a difficulty that arises, pause inwardly, not to think, not to analyze, but to rest for a breath in the remembrance. Of mine own self I can do nothing. The Father within me doeth the work. This pause, even if only for a second, restores you to the consciousness of oneness. It lifts you out of personal responsibility and returns you to the awareness that the same presence which spoke in the silence is here, now, in this very moment. When you touch this inner space before acting, you will find that action flows harmoniously. If there is something to say, the words are given. If there is something to do, the intuition arises gently, without strain. And if silence is required, you will feel it as naturally as a leaf turning toward the sun. Over time, this becomes not a practice, but a state of being. You come to realize that the presence that met you in your meditation is never absent. It walks through the day as your clarity, your love, your patience, your wisdom. It gradually becomes clear that there is no moment in which you live alone. The invisible Christ goes before you, stands behind you, and moves within you. This is spiritual living, not the attempt to remember God as a discipline, but the recognition that God is remembering you, carrying you, and expressing as you. When this awareness becomes the background of your life, even the simplest activities are transformed. The ordinary becomes sacred, the mundane becomes illumined, and every step you take is taken in the quiet assurance that you are never separate from the one who is your life. And now, as we bring this period of sharing to a close, let us once more return to that sacred stillness in which all true revelation takes place. For everything that has been spoken here is but a pointer, a gentle reminder to turn inward, where the real teacher abides. Words may inspire, concepts may uplift, but it is only the realized presence that transforms. And that presence is not far off. It is closer than breath, nearer than thought, hidden in the quiet depths of your own being. As we rest together in this moment, let us acknowledge, without effort and without strain, the simple truth: God is here. The invisible, the infinite, the very life that animates us is present now, complete and whole. Nothing needs to be added, nothing needs to be corrected, nothing needs to be improved. The kingdom we seek is already established within us. And so we do not leave this gathering in search of spirit, nor do we depart with tasks to accomplish or practices to perfect. We leave only with a gentle awareness that wherever we go, the presence goes with us, for it is our being. As this recognition deepens into conviction, you will find that life unfolds more harmoniously, not because you have made it so, but because you are no longer living as a separate self. You are living as a witness to the activity of God. And in that witnessing, every moment becomes a benediction. May the peace that is not of this world abide with you. May the light that cannot be extinguished illumine your path, and may the presence that has revealed itself in the silence continue to unfold its grace within you, guiding, sustaining, and fulfilling every step of your journey. We part outwardly, but inwardly we remain united in the one life, the one consciousness, the one Christ that is the truth of all being.